Finn taunts Dan in the execution chamber. Vikram expresses loyalty to Dan's father, but ultimately chooses Dan. Finn's men close in as Kyle gains access to the CCTV. The story opens with breaking news. International crime boss Liam McCaffrey has died in prison at the age of 76. From there, the film shifts into a covert operation already in progress. A mysterious voice orders someone to secure a package waiting in room 556 and to stay out of the lobby because of the cameras. The operative retrieves a hidden keycard and moves quickly through the building. During the mission, the operative receives a personal call, revealing he's late for date night but insists he'll be there. Inside the room, she locates the package, and then his partner arrives outside the window, having scaled the building just to make it to their date. Their reunion is playful, romantic, and full of teasing banter, right up until their babysitter calls with an emergency. Max, their young son, has thrown up everywhere. The parents immediately abandon date night and rush home. The film transitions to a lively Thanksgiving gathering where the entire Morgan family is present. Nina, the eldest daughter, calls in from London, where she is studying abroad. Family teasing continues, mixed with updates about Nina's journalism work and a reminder that she recently exposed the same criminal who died in prison. Tension rises between siblings, especially when Kyle, the teenage hacker of the family, gets scolded for nearly going to jail after wiping out the entire grade system as a senior prank. Meanwhile, their mother Jessica hints that she has received a major job opportunity as head of women's track at Ohio State, but she hasn't told her husband Dan yet. The next morning, Dan worries that he travels too much for work and decides the family needs a proper holiday together. When he hears about a job offer in London, he turns it into an idea. The Morgans will spend Christmas in London, letting him work a short contract while the whole trip becomes a paid business expense. The kids resist, but Dan insists. The family travels to London, trying to stay awake to avoid jet lag. But when they stop by Nina's flat unannounced, they discover a surprise. Nina is living with her new boyfriend, Omar. Omar is friendly, much to the parents' shock. Nina tries to smooth things over while the family adjusts to meeting him for the first time. As the day continues, Omar bonds, awkwardly, with Kyle, giving him philosophical advice and teaching him parkour, which nearly gets Max hurt. The parents become increasingly uneasy about Nina's relationship, but hide their concerns. That night, they agree to restart Morgan family Christmas. The following morning, after everyone sleeps off the travel exhaustion. The next day, Dan prepares for his meeting with the London bank that hired him. While Jessica worries about when to tell him about her possible job in Ohio, Dan heads into the bank for a routine security assessment. Inside, the bank representative wants Dan to carry out a full kinetic test, breaking in as if he were an intruder. Dan clones a security card, bypasses cameras, and demonstrates the building's vulnerabilities. But during the test, something goes wrong. Another man enters the secured area, armed and hostile. He reveals that Dan is not who the bank was expecting and forces to open a specific safe deposit box, number 411. Inside the bank vault, Dan opens the safe deposit box under threat. The gunman reveals that he knows exactly what's inside, a digital key, the key to the kingdom, granting access to Liam McCaffrey's hidden criminal empire. When Dan asks how he knows about it, the gunman shows a photo of Dan's son and asks if he recognizes the place. Dan does. Port Ram, his father's hometown. Then the truth hits him. The man he's facing is Finn, the housekeeper's son he grew up with. Finn reveals his real identity and explains that, unlike Dan, he was never allowed to use the McCaffrey name. Finn is Dan's half-brother. Finn tells Dan the reunion is going to be short. He takes the digital key and announces his plan. Dan will take the blame for the bank robbery, and Finn will walk away with everything. The contents of the key reveal all the crimes Dan once did for their father. If Dan talks, he'll end up executed. And Finn admits he could have gotten the key without Dan, but betraying him makes it sweeter. Finn forces Dan to help him escape the bank by staging a fake hostage scenario. Finn bursts out yelling that Dan has a gun. Police swarm the area. Finn disappears, leaving Dan to deal with the fallout. Outside, Jess reaches Dan, confused and worried. Dan tells her the police now think he robbed the bank and that they need to get the kids immediately. The couple sprints through London while dodging armed officers, and every attempt to hide it only makes their escape more chaotic. They steal a woman's handbag by accident, apologize mid-chase, and run through shops and alleys until they finally shake the police and return to their family's location. Meanwhile, Nina and Kyle are with Omar and Max, playing at a playground. Nina talks about missing home and how parents think they always know best. When Dan calls and urgently tells them to throw away their phones and stay put, the kids know something is seriously wrong. Moments later, Dan and Jess arrive in a panic, grab the children, and run. A car suddenly screeches to a stop. Finn is inside. He tries to kill them. On the moving bus, Finn continues threatening Dan, demanding the key. With the kids terrified, Dan finally snaps back that if Finn wants it, he can come get it. Finn attacks, but the fight ends with Dan knocking him back as the family leaps off the bus. Back at their hideout, Jess can feel Dan's despair. Dan decides the family won't run anymore. They'll end this by going to Paris, where Finn is now operating. The family boards a boat, leaving UK waters behind. During the trip, emotions run high. Nina is heartbroken about leaving the life she built in London. She tells Dan how happy she felt there and blames his past for dragging them all into danger again. Dan apologizes, but the damage is done. Meanwhile, Finn arrives in Paris and is welcomed by the remnants of their father's organization. He declares himself the new head of the McCaffrey empire. Dan then takes the family to a secret contact, Svetlana, a former Russian intelligence agent, and Dan's ex Jess is instantly jealous, especially after seeing Svetlana's dramatic greeting and her house full of cats. Still, Dan needs her help. He asks if she can access his father's encrypted server to understand Finn's next move. Svetlana agrees to help and feeds the family while Kyle struggles with her intense hospitality. Dan then prepares for a risky meeting. He wants to try reasoning with Finn. Jess argues he shouldn't, but Dan insists Finn is still his brother. Dan goes alone to a museum where Finn is waiting, unarmed due to metal detectors. The brothers finally talk. Finn reveals painful memories from childhood, watching Dan and their father from afar, freezing outside the mansion while wishing he belonged. Dan tells Finn that if he'd known they were brothers, things would have been different. He begs Finn to stop following their father's violent legacy, but Finn refuses. He wants everything Liam McCaffrey denied him: the power, the network, the empire. He mocks Dan's life as a family man, saying he'll never give all of that up for barbecues and birthday cards. The conversation breaks. Dan warns that if Finn comes after his family again, he will fight back as Sean McCaffrey, the killer his father trained. Finn walks away, unbothered, and immediately hires assassins to hunt Dan in Paris. Dan sits with Svetlana, drunk and emotional, telling her that for the first time in a long while, he finally had what he'd been looking for at a night with his family. He talks about how life gets complicated, how hard it is to juggle work, relationships, and raising kids, but nights like this make it all worth it. He thanks her for helping him protect his family. Svetlana suddenly confesses the truth. Finn has put a massive bounty on Dan. She swears she wasn't planning to kill him, only deliver him to Finn for the reward. She explains work has been slow and her cats are expensive. She feels guilty because Dan's little boy was so sweet, and because she drugged Dan earlier. Suddenly, she panics. The killers are coming. Right now. Dan's family wakes up in a rush as Svetlana admits she drugged Dan with her own chemical blend. Jess is furious, and Svetlana apologizes while urging them to escape. She hands over her car and tells them to leave quickly before her apartment turns into a battleground. The family runs outside, but the killers are already closing in. Dan is still heavily drugged, leaning on Jess, while Kyle is pushed toward the driver's seat. They discover the car is a stick shift just as the assassins move in. Kyle panics, he doesn't know how to drive a manual. Jess coaches him through the pedals while bullets fly and the attackers close in. Kyle lurches the car forward, grinding gears while the family shouts directions. Cars crash, assassins chase them, and Kyle barely keeps them alive. They speed through Paris streets, dodging vehicles, skidding around corners, and narrowly avoiding a head-on collision. At one point, Brian swerves past another car, and the entire family screams as they race through traffic. Kyle insists he's going as fast as the small car will allow. After a chaotic chase, they finally lose the attackers and skid to a stop. Kyle says he's never driving again. Later, Dan talks with Jess. He tried reasoning with Finn, but Finn refused to listen. Jess asks what they do next. Dan says his family needs a safe life away from him because everyone thinks Jess helped rob a bank. He tells them staying with him will only put them in danger. But the kids insist they're stronger together. They sit as a group and list their options. Run forever as the Andersons. Everyone rejects that idea. Turn themselves in. Dan goes to prison for life. They reject that too. Dan realizes the only real solution is to take down Finn's control of the McCaffrey criminal network. To do that, they must break into the mansion where Dan grew up and wipe the encrypted server. The family prepares a detailed plan. They'll infiltrate from the roof using body cams, comms, and surveillance gear. Kyle will access the mainframe once Dan installs a drive into the server. Jess will lead the operation from outside and trigger the emergency code word Andersons if anything goes wrong. They arrive near the mansion. Dan climbs rooftops with Omar while Kyle scans security frequencies. They disable cameras, sneak past guards, and advance across the estate. Dan encounters Harry, an old colleague from the organization, and ties him up without violence. On comms, Nina and Kyle coordinate frequencies while Dan moves deeper into the property. After clearing the last camera, the team reaches the mansion. Inside, they discover Dan's old belongings, everything he hid as a teenager. Then Finn appears. He reveals he used the same childhood secret passage Dan once boasted about. Finn wears Dan's old coat and taunts him before saying goodbye. Vikram, the family butler, escorts Dan away to the execution room. Outside, Jess catches Finn's voice on the radio. She realizes Dan is in danger and sees the flash drive lying on the ground. Kyle says they can still stop Finn if they get to the main computer. Although Dan said to abort the mission, Jess decides to override the plan. She goes into the mansion alone to finish the job and save him. Jess sprints through the halls, dodges guards, and races down to the server room. She panics at the sight of the massive underground chamber, but forces herself forward. Kyle guides her through the systems as she plugs in the device. Meanwhile, Finn taunts Dan in the execution chamber. Vikram expresses loyalty to Dan's father, but ultimately chooses Dan. Finn's men close in as Kyle gains access to the CCTV. Jess makes it into the server room and uploads the device while the assassins search for her. Kyle tracks her movement and warns her when guards approach. Kyle whispers instructions through the comms. When the assassin finds her, Jess attacks, fighting for her life. Jess manages to defeat the attacker. Downstairs, Finn corners Dan and calls him Little Prince, mocking their childhood. Jess manages to upload the device, neutralizing the McCaffrey network. Finn realizes his empire is gone. Dan confronts him, and Finn is left powerless. With the threat neutralized, the Morgans finally experience peace. They celebrate Christmas together, appreciating the value of family over power, money, or revenge. The family even donates money from Grandpa's accounts to Greenpeace, spreading the holiday spirit. The story ends with Dan introducing his family to the Secretary General of Interpol, recognizing their heroism in dismantling one of the most dangerous criminal networks in the world. Jess's career advances, Kyle and Nina return home, and the family celebrates a heartfelt Christmas together, reaffirming their bond. Finn is left defeated, and the Morgans prove that family is stronger than any empire.